I know that most of you have been waiting for this one. I'm going to teach you all about sampling in Logic Pro. Now, this is a very broad subject and also very deep, but I'm going to give you phase one just to get you started. Now, back in the days, we would take songs and we would take certain parts, like, you would take a section of a song if you could find like an empty drum line or a bass section at the end, and you would sample it like this. Now, today, you don't want to do that for legal reasons, so we're going to go ahead and learn to sample in Logic Pro. We have provided a session file for you to use. You can also just work from scratch if you feel confident enough. So the very first loop that we are using inside the Apple Loop browser is called After Hours, and it's this beat right here. All right, let me go back to the project notes. And the very first thing that I would love for you to get into is to customize by region. Now, how do you do that? If I control click on the entire region and I go down to convert and convert to new sampler track, key command control E, we've got a lot of different options here. So here in the create zones from project, I want you to select regions. And then one thing to really keep close at hand is where your trigger note range currently is. So this is where you're going to find the actual sample. So in my case, I have C3 selected as the beginning of this sample. And so I'm going to hit OK. All right, we're going to look for C3 on my keyboard. Now, if you can't find it for whatever reason, I recommend you click on the down arrow menu and you go to the custom view, because you now have access to the MIDI display up at the very top. And so eventually I get to C3. And there is the sample that we sampled. With this first technique, the only time you're going to be able to hear the sample is when you are holding down the note. So I'm going to go ahead and hold the note. And as soon as my finger comes off of the keys, I essentially can't hear the performance anymore. So this method of sampling is really great for introductions or a stutter effect. All right, so let me go ahead and Control R or record arm this track, and let me just create a basic intro on this software instrument track. All right, so now we can double click here and we can start making this work in our favor. So I'm going to take this performance and I'm going to drag it over to the left. By now, you should be working on this snap to grid system. So I'm going to choose division, hold option, and duplicate this over. And now we have this stutter effect. Check it out. That sounded okay, but it choked out a little bit too early. So I'm going to hit Command A and select the appropriate unit of measurement, in this case, division. And I'm going to go over all the way to the right. Some of you may be asking, why didn't you just hit Command J? Well, that's going to create just one long note, and I don't want it to play out the whole way. See, if it's not cut up, it'll sound like this. Right? It'll sound like the original sample. I want it to sound chopped up like this. So this is something that you can do with synthesizers, drums, all sorts of stuff. All right, so we have the old school way of sampling. We've got sampling by region. Now let's work with by transient. So you click on whatever the sample is. In this case, I'm going to use that same drum loop, and we'll go to convert to new sampler track. Let's hit the key command this time, Control E, and we're going to select transient marker. And the same thing exists here. We need to make sure we're mindful of the trigger note range. And look at the difference here. Look at what Logic did. It basically took every single transient or note and it dissected it in such a way where we can recreate the performance. Take a listen. But the best part is that each one of these notes is now taken into what we call a sampler instrument. More on this in Logic 202. But if I go into this mapping area, you can see that it took every one of those transients and mapped it across the keyboard starting on C3. So when I play C3, so this is fantastic for creativity, right? Because now I can take one of the hits, I can create my own beat from an existing loop or sample. And so what I did here in this example is I merely triggered the tambourine. Take a listen. Well, it sounds like a hi-hat tambourine mix, but now here's the idea. Check it out. Okay, so those are the older ways of sampling in Logic Pro, and they certainly have a place. I want to show you the new ways of sampling. And again, there's a lot more info, but we're going to start here. So we're going to take a quick listen to the Rise Above vocal. Again, this is inside of the Apple Loop browser. Okay, let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, what I want you to do is to customize the experience for yourself. So rather than sampling the whole thing, I want you to create different parts. Like this will be the first part for me. This will be the second part. Notice that I'm using the marquee tool and that I'm using ticks, so I am off of the grid and I can really hit these samples in a tight fashion. And why do you want to do that? Well, when you trigger the key, you want to make sure that the sample starts playing right away and it doesn't have a gap, unless that's your intended purpose, of course. So I'm creating all of my edit points and I am done. I find that making them a little bit shorter and creating a fade out is very helpful. And so what I want you to do now is I want you to drag these regions, the ones that you just customize, and I want you to click and drag them over to the track header. Let me remove my mug here so I can show you some details. One sec. Right, so once all of these regions are selected, click and hold and drag these into the track header. Something really special is going to happen. You will have the ability to create a sampler track right within the DAW. So I'm going to go ahead and select Sampler Chromatic. Please remember that I am still holding the mouse, and now I'm going to let go. So in the background, Logic will create a sampler instrument for you. The only difference is I didn't select the trigger range. You can see here, the beginning of this starts at C1. So let me look for C1 on my keyboard. All right, let's take a listen. And so now you can create another performance. So I'm going to mute the original performance and let's go ahead and try and put something on here. All right, here we go. Follow the normal protocol, go into the piano roll and quantize. Consider that maybe quantizing may not work. In other words, you may have everything lined up to the grid, but due to the nature of sampling and how just loose it can be, it might not sound right unless you move the actual MIDI event or the sample kind of out of the grid. So, you may need to move it like that or something. But for now, I'll stick to the grid because I had some pretty tight edits. And let's take a listen to what we got. Okay, go ahead and work on that assignment, and I will see you in the next video.